Kathmandu, Nepal. On September 8, 2025, the streets of Nepal's capital erupted in protest. What began as anger over a government ban on social media and allegations of rampant corruption quickly spiraled into the most violent unrest the Himalayan nation has witnessed in 2 decades. Within 48 hours, the uprising would force the resignation of the country's prime minister, sending shockwaves through South Asia and beyond. The immediate trigger was the government's decision to impose sweeping restrictions on social media platforms. Officials defended the move as necessary to combat misinformation, but to many Nepalis, it was the last straw in a long list of frustrations. For years, citizens had accused successive governments of turning a blind eye to corruption, failing to deliver jobs and ignoring the aspirations of a young population desperate for accountability. The sudden silencing of online voices, seen by many as an assault on free expression, ignited fury. Crowds gathered in Kathmandu's main squares on September 8th, chanting slogans, waving the national flag, and calling for change. What was expected to be a day of demonstrations swelled into something much larger, an outpouring of rage that engulfed the nation. By September 9th, aerial footage captured scenes reminiscent of a war zone. Plumes of black smoke rose from government buildings, supermarkets, and even the president's residence. Burnt-out vehicles littered the streets. Tires blazed at intersections. In Singha Durbar, the government's administrative hub, the chaos reached its peak. Protesters smashed through gates, brandished weapons, and set fire to offices. Flames consumed entire buildings as smoke choked the skyline. Images from AFP TV showed protesters climbing the gates of Singha Durbar, defiantly carrying Nepal's red and blue flag. Motorbikes were piled together and torched, while government vehicles were reduced to twisted metal. The visuals were stark, a symbolic assault on the very heart of the state. The violence, unprecedented since the early 2000s Maoist insurgency, quickly overwhelmed security forces. Police fired tear gas, but the scale of the crowds made containment impossible. Within hours, pressure mounted on the Prime Minister. Facing the prospect of escalating bloodshed and total loss of control, he announced his resignation. It was a dramatic fall from power, driven not by parliamentary manoeuvring, but by raw anger in the streets. Observers described the episode as a turning point in Nepal's fragile democracy. For a nation that only emerged from monarchy less than 2 decades ago, the sight of protesters torching parliament carried deep symbolism. Protesters were clear in their message. Many shouted that 2 decades of promises had gone unfulfilled. They accused politicians of looting state coffers, enriching themselves while ordinary citizens struggled. One young demonstrator, hoisting the national flag atop Singha Durbar's gate, told local reporters, "This is our house and these leaders have stolen from us for too long. We will not stop until we have a government that listens to the people." Others echoed similar sentiments, insisting that resignation was not enough. The demand was for systemic change, accountability, and an end to corruption that many say has hollowed out the state. The unrest quickly drew international concern. Nepal, wedged between India and China, holds strategic importance in South Asia. Both New Delhi and Beijing urged restraint, fearing that instability could spill across borders. The United Nations Human Rights Office condemned the crackdown that initially attempted to disperse protesters, calling for dialogue rather than violence. A spokesperson noted, "The grievances of the people must be heard, not silenced." Neighbouring countries, too, watched with unease. For India, instability in Nepal poses risks of refugee flows and border unrest. For China, unrest in Kathmandu threatens its Belt and Road projects that cut through Nepal's rugged terrain. Nepal's history is scarred by political upheaval. In 2006, a people's movement forced the monarchy to surrender power, paving the way for a republic. Since then, the country has cycled through frequent governments, plagued by instability and corruption scandals. The recent protests evoked memories of that transformative era. This time, however, the anger was fueled not by ideology, but by frustration with governance. Social media, ironically, the very platform the government sought to suppress, had been the rallying point for dissent. On the evening of September 9th, Kathmandu's air was thick with smoke. Journalists described supermarkets looted, parliament ablaze, and the president's residence surrounded by angry crowds. Some protesters armed themselves with sticks and even firearms. Video footage showed mobs smashing motorbikes together and setting them alight, while others torched cars on the streets. police lines broke down repeatedly. For many residents, the city had become unrecognizable. Local shopkeeper Ramesh Shrestha described the fear. "I closed my shop in the afternoon, but by evening the smoke was everywhere, and we could hear explosions, see fire in every direction. It felt like the city had no government anymore." By late night, the Prime Minister issued a statement. In it, he admitted that he could no longer govern effectively amid the crisis. His resignation, he argued, was necessary to prevent further bloodshed. Political analysts noted that while his departure may have calmed the streets temporarily, it left a dangerous vacuum. With no clear successor, Nepal's fragile institutions face a daunting challenge. One academic from Tribhuvan University explained, "The resignation is not the end of the crisis. It is the beginning. Unless the next government confronts corruption and restores public trust, these protests will return." The crisis also underscored Nepal's vulnerable position between rival powers. Both India and China have invested heavily in infrastructure and trade routes through Nepal. Prolonged instability threatens those projects. Western governments, meanwhile, worry that the collapse of democratic governance could embolden authoritarian actors in the region. Already, some fear that military or populist figures may exploit the chaos to seize power. For ordinary Nepalis, the immediate concern is stability. Schools remain closed, businesses shuttered, and transport disrupted. The streets of Kathmandu, once bustling with tourists and vendors, now carry the scars of burnt vehicles and charred buildings. But beneath the smoke, a new determination has taken root. Protesters vow not to relent until meaningful reforms are enacted. Social media, despite restrictions, continues to carry their message. As one protest leader put it, "This is not just about a prime minister. This is about an entire system that has failed us. We want a new beginning." The fall of Nepal's prime minister in September 2025 will be remembered as one of the nation's most dramatic political collapses since the abolition of the monarchy. Sparked by a ban on social media, but fueled by years of pent-up anger over corruption and misrule, the protests demonstrated the power of public rage in shaping political outcomes. The aerial images of flames rising from Singha Durbar, of protesters waving flags from atop government gates, and of smoke blanketing Kathmandu will remain etched in history. Nepal now faces an uncertain road between the hope of reform and the risk of deeper turmoil. But one truth is undeniable: the voice of the people has once again changed the course of this small but strategic nation.